Hello and welcome to yet another interesting edition of Off the Press. It's still a new week with a new outlook, and I'm Tokunbo Taiwo, ever ready to bring you the biggest stories and the biggest headlines from the national dailies here in Nigeria. We've got quite a number of newspapers today. We've got This Day, we've got the Nation newspaper, we've got Vanguard, and we've got The Punch. And if we've got time, then we'll also handle complete sports with our in-house analyst. But before then, let's start with This Day newspaper. We'll quickly bring up the This Day newspaper up on your screen. There it is. We're starting at the very top and then working our way down. So we're starting with the very top headline there, which is with NPO's intervention, NBC and DAR resolve dispute. That's the National Broadcasting Commission and the African Independent Television and DAR Communications as well. Underneath that headline, we've got regulator to lift suspension of license and AIT and Ray Power to withdraw suit. That story starts on that front page and continues on page 6. Also at the top, we've got just underneath that first headline, we've got mixed reactions greet SEC. That's the Security and Exchange Commission's suspension of Owando's AGM. That's the annual general meeting. That story is detailed on page 6. Okay, now onto the main headline at the bottom of your screen. We can see APC meets the National Assembly members-elect, restates support for Lawan and Baja Biamila. And underneath that, we've got nominate Omoagege for Deputy Senate President and Wase for Deputy Speaker. Also, suspense as PDP legislators play their cards close to their chests. Okay, at the bottom of This Day newspaper, we have just on the left-hand side there, we've got Article 6 speedy trial as Bulkachua appoints a replacement. That story starts on that front page and continues on page 6. And underneath that, we've got NJC commends Buhari on Nogen. That story is also detailed on page 6. And that's it on This Day front page. Let's see what's available on the back of This Day newspaper. It's the usual article. Tuesday with Ruben Abati, and it's talking about June 12. The title actually is On June 12 We Stand. If you want to find out more about what that's all about, then you can grab a copy of This Day newspapers. And that's it really on This Day newspapers. Let's move on to our next newspaper. We've got the Nation newspaper next. Yes, and there's quite a number of stories. Let's quickly bring that onto your screen. There it is. We're starting at the top once again. In the top left-hand corner, we've got tomorrow is holiday as Buhari signs June 12 bill. That story is on page 9. Underneath that, we've got JAMB releases 15,490 UTME results. That story is also on page 9 as well. If we look at the top right-hand corner, we can see Obas criticize Olubadan over festival. That story is on page 41. We have Justice Garba replaces Bulkachua on page 7. Owando to hold AGM despite SEC's order on page 12. And the last story in the top right-hand corner, underneath those other stories, is Super Eagles holds first training in Egypt. And that story is detailed in page 45. Okay, let's look at the bottom of the screen now. We've got the bottom of Nation newspaper. Don't use standing rules 2015. Court orders senators. And underneath that, we've got in red legal backing for open ballot. We've also got a photograph in the bottom right-hand corner with a Lagos police parading 202 suspected cultists in Ikorodu, with some of their arms also in the bottom right-hand corner, and the suspected cultists in the larger picture. So there are two pictures there on the right-hand side of the Nation newspaper. Okay, there are still a number of stories at the very bottom there in red. INEC decides on Okorocha today. That story is on page 9. And the last story on the front cover of the Nation newspaper is in the bottom right-hand corner. Abductors demand 10 million naira to free mother and son. That story is on page 5. Okay, let's look at the back of the Nation newspaper. The back of the Nation newspaper, we've got the usual columns by Louis Odion. The bottom line is also talking about June 12, as with this day newspaper, but it's regarding June 12, military cult and PMB's ritual offering. More details on that particular back page. At the bottom, we've got hardball, another column. A wrist for a fish. That's it on the back column of the Nation newspaper. If you want to find out more about that, grab a copy on any of the headlines or any of the stories. If you want to find out more about that, grab a copy of the Nation newspaper and you'll be provided with more details. And that's it on the Nation newspaper. Let's quickly move on to our next newspaper. We've got a number of papers left. We've got the Vanguard and we've got the Punch. And like I said earlier, if we've got time, we'll also handle sport and we'll be bringing in an in-house analyst to actually discuss that. But before then, let's quickly go on a break. When we return, we'll be handling the Vanguard newspaper and the Punch newspaper, and also we'll be looking at sports if we've got time. But now, a quick break and then we'll come back to discuss Vanguard and the Punch headlines. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Off the Press. Today, Tuesday, the 11th of June 2019. Today's edition, we've got Vanguard newspapers and the Punch newspaper. Earlier before the break, we discussed the headlines in the Nation and This Day newspapers as well. So we're moving quickly on to the Vanguard newspaper. Let's look at the headlines that are there. We'll quickly bring that up on your screen and then we'll work our way from the top to the bottom. We've got in the top left-hand corner, how kidnappers attacked my convoy, and that's Akeredolu speaking. That story is on page 10. And on the right-hand side, we've got in the top right-hand corner, NPO resolves MBC AIT face-off. That story we've seen on a number of newspapers earlier on. That story is detailed on page 9. Underneath that, also in the top right-hand corner, we've got 32-year-old emerges Oyo Assembly Speaker. And that story, quite an interesting story, is on page 51. Underneath all those stories, we've got CBN also at the top. CBN to sell 809.4 billion naira treasury bills in Q3 of 2019. That story is detailed on page 19. Okay, let's look at the main headline, which is at the bottom of your screen right now in large capital letters. We've got 9th National Assembly, fresh twist as court orders open ballot. That story is on page 9. Okay, let's go to the bottom of the Vanguard newspaper now. We've got a picture there of Mrs. Adeyinka Adekoya, Managing Director, WAPIC Insurance PLC, and a number of other directors during the 60th Annual General Meeting of WAPIC Insurance PLC in Lagos yesterday. And to the right of that picture, we've got Emir Sanusi saying, we only executed our mandate. Kanu Anti-Graft Agency. That story is on page 13. And underneath that, also on the right-hand side of the newspaper, we've got Zamfara. Bandits killed 23 in a reprisal attacks. And Buhari says that he'll neutralize banditry, terrorism, and kidnapping. The story is detailed on page 8. Okay, let's look at the lower bottom half of the Vanguard newspaper. We've got in green there intrigues as Lawan Ndume square up today, and there are a number of sub headlines there. We've got we're still talking to Ndume, says Oshiomole, and APC Gbajabiamila camps procure credit card for members. Members frown at publishing of names for endorsement, say separation of powers must be maintained. All of those stories are detailed detailed on page 5. At the bottom of the Vanguard newspaper, we've got on the bottom left-hand side, we've got JAMB releases another 15,490 results. That story is on page 8. In the middle, also at the bottom, we've got official June 12 now Democracy Day. That's on page 14. On the right-hand side of that, we've got Buhari versus Atiku. Garba takes over panel as INEC queries exclusion of Oshibajo in petition. That story is also on page 8. We've got a number of columnists at the bottom there. They're on pages 17, 18, 32, 52 with Odumakin, Teniola, Mailafia, and Aribisala. Those respectively, all of those are available inside the Vanguard newspaper. Let's look at the back now quickly. It's all a lot of sports, headlines at the back of the Vanguard newspaper, with Raw saying, I dropped Iheanacho before Zimbabwe match. But I guess we'll be looking at that once we come to the sports segment of the program. So let's quickly move on to our next newspaper now, which is The Punch. Yes, The Punch newspaper is next in line, and we start at the top once again. FG and the distribution companies need $4.3 billion to improve power supply. That's according to the TCN, and that's on page 29. And underneath that, starting from working my way from the left to the right, we have Garba replaces Bokachua. Tribunal hears 16 applications on Atiku's petition today. Now that story is on page 9. We've got next to that story in the middle, Nigerian press organization settles AIT and NBC feud, and that story is on page 8. And to the right of that story, we've got debt servicing gobs over 50% of Nigeria's revenue, and that's according to the AFDB. That's on page 32. Okay, the main headline is right in the center at the bottom there. 9th National Assembly, PDP backs Indume, Bago as APC insists on Lawan Bajabia Miller, and that story is on page 2. Okay, let's look at the bottom of the Punch newspapers now. The bottom, we've got a huge picture there showing fans who are invading the pitch after the Nigeria Professional Football League Championship playoff match between Enugu Rangers and Kano Pillars at the Agege Stadium here in Lagos, and that took place yesterday. Absolute violence erupts after the Rangers and Pillars NPFL clash. The full details of that story are available on page 43. Okay, underneath that we can see, let's see now, just underneath that we've got on the left-hand side, just above the green column there, we can see Northern Elite Prompting Poverty, says Mogalu. That story is on page 18. And next to that, we can see herdsmen abduct woman, stepson in Ondo demand 10 million naira ransom, which is on page 4. And to the right-hand side, we've got Owando share price drops as SEC suspends AGM. That story is on page 5. At the very bottom of the Punch newspaper, we have in green on the left-hand side, 7 feared dead as cultists cause mayhem in Lagos communities. And in red, we've got generator fumes kill twins, 8 wedding guests in Imo. That story is on pages 4 and 5. And the last story on the front cover of the Punch newspaper is in the top right, not top right, in the bottom right-hand corner of the Punch newspaper, and it's in green. Malpractices, JAMB releases fresh 15,490 result and cancels 321. That story is on page 8. Okay, let's see what's available behind the usual columns once again. This time it's by Azuka Onwuka, who's talking about kidnappers' invasion of Southwest and the conspiracy of silence. If you want to find out more about that, then grab a copy of the Punch newspapers this morning. Okay, we've got time left for sports, complete sports. That's what we've got time for. But before we go into the details, we'll take a quick break right now. When we come back, hopefully we'll have a sports analyst here to analyze the major headlines in the sporting industry. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Off the Press, and we've gone through the major headlines on the national dailies. Yes, and time now is for sport. And joining us here in the studio is our in-house analyst, Samson Oloyede. Hi, Samson. It's always a pleasure to have you here in the studio.
It's a pleasure being here.
Okay, good. So we've got complete sport. I'll just take our viewers through the major stories, and then we can discuss one or two of those headlines. Okay. So we've got complete sport here, and we're starting at the very top. Eagles begin training in Ismaili, and I think that's just an error there. It's supposed to be Ismaili. And also, let's look at the bottom now, or the central part. I can see just on the left-hand side, Aino to Iheanacho Ajayi, don't brood over missing 2019 AFCON. Okay, underneath that, we've got Simon. I can play left back for Eagles. Happy to make AFCON 2019 squad. And also to the further left, we have Toro confirmed 10 million euros Ola Aina deal. Okay, to the right-hand side, we have Raw, why I dropped Iheanacho. And underneath that, we've got Keita to feature in Egypt friendly, says Guinea coach Paul Pot. Underneath that, we've got Osimhen set to join Atlanta. Okay, so these are the stories on complete sports, but I also want us to look at one of the stories that was made the front page on the Punch newspaper, because I thought that was quite an interesting story, and I think we should also talk about that before we actually even move on into complete sport. So on the front page of the Punch newspaper, we have a photograph of violence erupting in Lagos after the Pillars and Rangers NPFL clash. What's your initial reaction?
Well, it took football back to the 18th century, where fans invaded the pitch and violence was the order of the day. It's not something you want to commend at this stage of the game in terms of development and growth. I think it's shameful that there were not enough security personnel to actually contain the situation. That's to start with. And we've talked about fans' orientation over time in terms of dealing with their emotions and understanding that the referee's decision is final. The officiating was fair enough. The penalty call against Kano Pillars, at the last minutes of the regulation time was duly awarded. There was no basis for the outrage. And it's shameful that the Kano Pillars, captain Rabi Ali, who has played in the league for several years, over a decade, was the one who instigated, the protests, if you want to call it that way, because he shoved the referee during the match, even after the match. And you saw the fans coming. At first, they hauled objects onto the field of play, water bottles, stones, and at some point, they were able to break through the barrier and invade the pitch. And as the picture depicts, it's an horrific, scenario, because we saw planks, clubs, and what have you.
Yes.
And it's shameful. We shouldn't be having that at this stage. Players are not safe. The officials are not safe.
That's the thing.
It's ridiculous, really.
Absolutely. And this is something that happens not just on an African scale. I think violence usually erupts on other football pitches around the world during matches and stuff. So what I'm asking, what you think can be done to curb such kind of violence?
Well, a whole lot. Usually, when you get to see incidents like this, is during a very fiery derby clash, and it's mostly in South America that it even happens. You hardly see, probably Chelsea against Arsenal, and you witness such, sins. It's usually in South America sins like this happen. Here in Africa, we need more orientation in terms of fans' orientation to understand that, in as much as the game is an emotional one and there has to be some sort of reaction to whatever is going on field of play, certain things are hard limits or red lines, and they shouldn't be crossed. What happened yesterday is shameful and shouldn't have happened. And more importantly, probably more security personnel has to be deployed.
I was going to go there.
Yes, because from the footages, we saw few policemen around. There were not up to 10, who trooped onto the field to contain the situation. And in instances like this, you need more hands on deck to be able to contain whatever excesses the fans drop.
Okay, Samson, because of time, let's leave that there and move on to complete sports now. Let's start with let's see now, Raw, why I dropped Iheanacho. What's he talking about?
Well, basically, it's talking about his form. It's talking about his fitness. Majority even questioned the call-up to start with. That shouldn't have been called up among the professional squad. So I think no one really has issues with he being dropped out of the AFCON squad, because if you look at last year or the last season, he struggled for playing time, and even when he got it, he couldn't justify the minutes he got. So it's well deserved.
Okay, we're pushed for time, but I want to ask you if there's any other headline you want to discuss before we wrap up.
Yeah, Eagles have begun training in Smiley ahead of the AFCON 2019 championship, and it's just 10 days away. They'll be playing Senegal in a friendly. That's a good way to test themselves ahead of the AFCON itself. We're in a very easy group, and we should qualify with ease against the likes of Burundi or Guinea.
For that friendly
against Senegal, it's difficult. Senegal is the top team, top-ranked nation on the continent. But in terms of the group, we'll definitely progress, or we should progress. Let me put it that way.
Depending on the training.
Depending on the training. And finally, Torino confirms the £10 million deal for Oloyede. It's a good move for him. He's been on loan there from Chelsea, and definitely he's found playing time very hard to come by at Chelsea. At Torino, he's cemented the place for himself, and it seems more like home. So I think it's good in terms of playing time, in terms of keeping up with his developments in the game.
Yeah, and the number of transfers at the bottom of the complete sports. I wish we had time, but the figures are just absolutely interesting. But unfortunately, we're out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up. Thank you very much, Samson, for your input this morning. Okay, we've been discussing with Samson Oloyede, our in-house analyst, who's been giving us his own analysis of the major sports stories. We're back tomorrow with another edition of Off the Press, where we'll be bringing you all of the major stories from the national dailies. Until then, I remain Tokunbo Taiwo saying good morning.